Hey everyone, good morning. Thank you for joining us. It's a big pleasure to have everyone here on this panel. I'd actually always wanted to meet Yacht. I finally get to do it today, and then joined by other friends that we've known from before. So I prepared a couple of questions to discuss with them. We were also having a pretty awesome discussion backstage, and we have the benefit of just a lot of us have done a lot of panels before, and we can sort of keep it casual and more interactive. The question that I wanted to start with is, there has been a lot said in crypto about people that start with infrastructure and then try to find content for it, whether it's with grants or investments, but attracting content applications to the chain. And then we have the other path, which is starting with the product first, firing millions of users, and then launching the infrastructure on top. Many would say that in crypto, open source, composable technologies, that the technology itself is perhaps not defensible or not special enough to be the most special thing, and what's special is the community. Whereas others would look at something like, for example, what Sui has done with parallelized transactions and all that goes around the Move ecosystem and say, hey, this is quite new and quite special. So I'd love to start with Adini and Alex and understand from each of your perspective, how do you think about the debate between starting chain first and having to go find your users, find your applications, versus just building a product that people love and then launching the infrastructure on top, and perhaps what you think about the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, good question. I don't know if people can hear me. Our view generally is technology actually absolutely does matter. So we started with a premise at looking at what was available in the ecosystems that existed already. And from our vantage point at Facebook, we saw there was a lack of real focus on building things of high quality for scale. It was great when you had maybe 100, 200, 300 users, but when you want to start dealing with the scale of Facebook, billions of users on a regular basis, there was nothing really there for that audience. So we built a system that was largely object-based. So if you're a developer and you build things with object in mind, anyone writing games is going to think of objects. We built it focused on allowing developers to build really compelling applications from a gaming perspective. So our vantage point is we build the best technology for developers, allow developers to be as expressive as possible, and they will come. And that's what we've seen. I think Sui is becoming one of the go-to destinations for the best game developers today. In fact, some of the top game publishers in Korea are already publishing on Sui. We recently launched the Sui Play 0x1 games console and operating system that allows anybody to run both Web 2 and Web 3 games on a single platform. So our view is really enabling developers to be as broadly distributed as possible using our platforms and applications we build. But generally, we think that's a point. We aren't a game publisher. We don't think we can build the best games, but we know developers can build the best possible applications, and what we want to do is have the best set of tools to allow devs to be as expressive as possible. So that's been our focus predominantly for Sui.
I think from our perspective, it kind of depends on the stage of the evolution where we are in the space. So broadly speaking, when we look at gaming, which is the segment that I guess all of us are in here somewhat involved, is the demand of the technology comes from the content first, right? Meaning that, why NVIDIA became NVIDIA is because people wanted to play games better, right? And it wasn't the other way around, in the sense that NVIDIA created wonderful graphic cards, and then people said, okay, let's build a game that can build that application. It was kind of, the demand came the other way around. And I think the problem we're solving in Web3 is ownership, right? So I think in this case, now that I have the ability to own something, what technology allows you to do that? And I think this makes it possible for Sway and Ronin and others to come in and say, actually, we have better solutions around that. But the demand comes from the fact that there are gamers out there wanting to solve a problem in this paradigm, which in Web3 would be ownership and the benefits of ownership, but in other areas would be better graphics, better entertainment, and that drives innovation. In fact, I find it fascinating that gaming as an industry is the reason why NVIDIA came to life. And now we have, this is the birth of, GPU, mining with ASICs rigs for Bitcoin, and now AI actually really came from a gaming route, right? But again, the other thing that I like is that the demand was whimsical. It wasn't a utility. It was actually something fun and creative, which I think also speaks to us as humans, right? Actually, we're driven by these things that are more whimsical in nature that then drive innovation forward and then actually create really utility applications. So I would say sort of the human desire is the first thing. The human demand is the first thing you want to solve, and then the technology will come towards it and advance it. And I think you have a story around that, right? In terms of starting as a game and then launching a chain, right?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because we have a very different view on, I think maybe blockchains and gaming in general. It sounds like quite different strategies. So I inherently believe that blockchains and tokens are about social coordination. And I think that when you look at the technology in isolation, it's not really that special. For example, Bitcoin as a technology, sure, it solved a lot, but the real special thing about Bitcoin is that it managed to gather a community together, right? So you have all of these people that believe together that this is going to be something great. And I think that's really what we believe in Axie and Ronin too, because without the Axie community, there wouldn't be any Ronin. Like, we started out making a game, we created this core community of players, and then we took those players and we turned them also into a core part of the Ronin community. And from there, we wanted to leverage that into becoming a distribution platform and then actually a publisher, right? So Sui might say that they're not a publisher. At Sky Mavis, we're saying very clearly we will function as a Web3 game publisher. We want to advise the game studios on tokenomics, on go-to-market. But one thing that we don't want to do is make the games ourselves. We look for specific games in specific niches, like MMOs in particular, which we've seen a lot of success with. And from there, we want to take them to market with our community of players who we know are gamers. So we try to create a network effect like that. And with us, I think it's been very successful. We see a lot of inbound. We can't accept all the games, unfortunately. I think just recently with the Forge program, which we're launching or announcing actually tomorrow, we had over 150 applicants of great teams that wanted to build with us, but we only accepted 6. So I think that's like a very high bar to get on Ronin for now, which is kind of contrarian to the general blockchain belief where everything should be open. Now, I'm excited about what will happen when we open up Ronin, but there was also challenges about that, which then again is tied to technology. So I think these things come in tandem. It's just our priority will be community first, always. And from there, we will focus on that the technology over time will evolve, because for us, technology is more of a commodity, a tool that we can use to fill in the gap within our community.
Perhaps a quick follow-up on the point of the challenges of opening and this more measured approach to the growth of ecosystem partners for Ronin so far. From our perspective at Bitcraft, it seems like one of the great successes of Ronin is that you have been able to point your community and say, here's this awesome new game, here's Pixels, and there's going to be something that comes after Pixels, and you're really able to point them that way. We're now moving into a next phase of Ronin where we're going to have the Forge program, and so I kind of think of, we have Axie as what you guys made, and it's your first baby, and then you have the original initial partners to Ronin, and now a little bit of second-tier junior partnership thing, and then at some point maybe it opening up. How do you think about your ability to continue pointing the community and having the trust of the community to say, hey, Ronin says this is awesome, let me go here, as you go broader? Like, how do you balance between your ability to be an amazing curator, effectively, with the amount of content and ultimately users that you need to go through the technology and have the kind of activity that will over the long term drive valuation?
Yeah, so I think about this quite a lot because, as you're saying, like, we don't want to end up in a place where the game studios that come and work with Sky Mavis and Ronin feel like they're not being taken care of as much as preferred partners or the partners who are not part of, let's say, the Forge program. So we think the Forge program is great because it actually opens up more for game studios that maybe didn't fit our mold. So one thing that's funny is, as the years have progressed, our our barrier of entry is becoming so high that we would have missed out on a studio like Sky Mavis because we wouldn't have lived up to our own expectations today. So that's why we actually made the Forge program, so we could lean into more experimental teams that we think would maybe be a good fit with the community, but maybe not fit into exactly everything that we think is going to work. Because it's such an open space that there are many things that can work that we don't know about. Now, moving forward from there, let's assume that Ronin is fully open tomorrow. We have DPoS fully open, zk EVM works, anyone can spin up their own chain. So the question is actually, how do we then distribute users? Because it's going to be very crowded. In this case, I actually think that Sky Mavis will play a more important role. So then you would have Ronin as kind of like the internet at the bottom, which would be permissionless, anyone can deploy. But curation usually happens at the application layer. So if you go to YouTube, Twitch, or whatever, there are streams that are featured. Even in Steam, there are games that are featured. So I see Sky Mavis playing the role of a curator, and the games that permissionlessly deploy on Ronin will have a chance to kind of pitch themselves to the community, build up that initial traction, and then get picked up by Sky Mavis or other publishers that want to work on Ronin too. And from there, really take them to the next level. So very similar to Web2 publishing, except that it's kind of focused on the Ronin ecosystem specifically.
Thank you. And Yada, a question for you in a similar direction. When we began deploying our first fund in crypto in 2021, Animoca was one of the highest signal investors in the space. You were one of the first investors in the space and super selective. And whenever Animoca was on the cap table, it was like, oh, hey, like Animoca's here. As you have all grown, I think in the last cycle, we started seeing you all in a lot of deals. And then now we have Animoca, and there's a fund, and there's the studios that you guys are more involved in, or projects like Ape Chain or Sandbox, and the ones that perhaps are smaller investors, and then the ones that you're just partners. How do you think about the management of this and the conflicts of this? Like, how do the wires not cross, and how can you expand so much while providing a good service to the people that you work with, and how while preserving your own reputation, right, as preeminent investors in the space?
Yeah, so first, I think the way that we think our philosophy underpinning in Web3 is what we call sharing the network effect, because we think of Web3 as, because of the permissionless structures, at the end of the day, the network effects are one that can sort of transfer around. So it's a bit different in the Web2 world, where the network effects that companies like Facebook or Apple or Google are actually belonging to them, and you have to seek permission to enter them, which means that you're playing a different type of game. But we don't think that's really possible in Web3. Because ultimately, even if you look at Ronin, right now it's a curated approach, but Ronin's long-term success will be opening it up over time. And basically, the process of decentralization actually is one where third parties start building products, because you need to, the way to build sustainable scale is to have network effects that can compound on each other. And any type of system that actually ends up creating restrictions on the network effects will actually limit themselves. I look at the parallel very much like open source code versus closed source, right? Closed source you can control and manage, but at the end, you can't compete when millions of developers add value to the code in one form or the other, right? And that's one of the reasons why Ethereum, for instance, yeah, it's more expensive, it's inefficient, it's got all these problems. So why is it still where it is today? Because it has these compound network effects that people are building on and building scaling solutions and so on. And that's kind of how we think of it from the investing lens as well, which is why we have over 540 investments in the space, many of them in gaming. But we think of this as essentially helping grow that ecosystem space, and that's basically how we ensure that we have a stake in the whole ecosystem. But on management, so that was kind of part of the reason why we launched Mochaverse. The Mocha ID is a way where we want to empower our community, which is much more investor type. So meaning, we have about 1.8 million users, but I would say 800,000 that are active. They're actually more like people who are investors, managers in the space, almost like professional in a way. And they end up doing governance on Ape Chain or ApeCoin, for instance. They get involved in the products and services. And for that, they receive reward from basically our token supply, for instance, right? So for instance, when we did Pixels, right, the Mochaverse community ended up creating utility, adding network effects, and adding value to the ecosystem. For that, they received benefits, but they actually helped sort of, from a decentralized standpoint, create some of the work required. Because we're not going to be in a position to manage a portfolio of thousands of companies entirely by ourselves. That linear scale growth doesn't work for us. But ideally, we can actually make, in an ideal future, the management of the portfolio and the network effects around that, basically one where the community can cooperate with each other. And that's why we're also building reputation systems, right? In other words, in the same way that you have a reputation as a good VC, you could actually build a reputation as a good member in Mochaverse, then basically projects will come to you, and it becomes almost like a sort of employment network, as in terms of, which project can help you with advisory, which guy can help you with launching a project. That's kind of how we think of that space, right? And we hope to have thousands of portfolio companies in the future. It frankly is less important for us to be looked at as the VC that has sort of, like some VCs like A16Z, for instance, take very concentrated bets on that. We actually think that's against the ethos of Web3. Because when you do that, you're by its nature thinking about monopolies, right? If you put all your eggs in one basket, well, guess what happens, right? You can only focus on the one thing. You only want that one thing to succeed, which I don't think fits the nature of Web3. I also think it's incompatible, right, because of the permissionless nature where network effects are shared across. One example, if Bitcoin was to become hundreds of thousands of dollars, or even something like Solana went from $130 to $1,000, even though people here might not directly benefit because they don't own the token, actually the entire ecosystem grows because liquidity can flow through. That's an effect that actually doesn't really happen in Web 2, but absolutely happens in Web 3.
Thank you. So Adani, we started looking at Move and Sui probably 2 years ago. One of our guys, Ben, published one of our very first in-house research pieces talking about object-oriented languages, the unique affordances for gaming and for that kind of product. I'd love to understand from you, though, like from an ecosystem perspective, right? Like one big ecosystem is just the ecosystem of developers. How many people are comfortable building in your ecosystem? So I'd love to understand from you how you think about the pro and con, or the process of onboarding people onto your language, and how do you do that, especially when the market is quieter and there's not a lot of net new developers coming in, and you have to say, hey, I know everyone does Solidity, and everyone is comfortable with Solidity, but come here and learn this new thing. And before you start, Michael is joining us on stage. He is the CEO of Star Atlas, who have been building a space exploration game for a long time, and I'm happy that he's joining us so I can get to ask him some questions too.
Yeah, I'm happy to expand on that. First thing I'd say, look, I vehemently disagree that technology doesn't matter. I actually think technology is paramount. I can exemplify that. We have a plethora of games that were previously building on Solana, previously building on Aptos, previously building on various EVM-related chains that are now choosing to build on Sui. Why? Because if they have any smell of success, immediately the platform doesn't work. So if your focus is a very small subset of crypto rather than a broad market, fine, maybe it works. But when you want to do anything at scale with real users and real money, you cannot use existing platforms. That's the first thing. So our obsession on day one has always been a developer-first platform. We know how to build developer platforms. We know if you build a platform for devs that takes care of their use cases, that allows them to achieve business-related outcomes, you win. So we're starting to see that, and I think over the next 3 to 4 months, as games start to launch, like Society, which we're actually partners at Animoca on, you start to see amazing games who are building games that are really taking the concept of ownership to a whole new level. These will be the pinnacle, or at least the platform by which other games would see how you can interact and create new emerging communities in gaming. So for us, innovating with Move, building an object-based system, allowing developers to onboard just simply using email with ZK Login that we invented, it really allows game studios to now onboard users with the least amount of friction. By the way, I think wallets are the dumbest thing that has ever been created in crypto. The idea that people have to download an app before they engage is the dumbest idea ever. So this is why things like ZK Login, allowing people to log in by email, never worrying about gas because it's sponsored, separating the concern between who submits a transaction versus who pays a transaction. These are the kind of primitives that developers need to build compelling Web 2-like experiences. I keep saying Web 2 has a best UX. Crypto has a worse UX. Crypto has a best value prop. Web 2 doesn't. So you have to merge the two, which is our goal. And I think our goal is really allowing the Web 2 and Web 3 world to merge, and you get the best of both worlds in that regard. So we're seeing a mass amount of adoption in Move. Platform's only been live for a year. We're already number 2 based non-EVM chain. And Move is more than 6% of all devs in Web 3 already in the space of a year. And that's because it takes nothing more than 3 to 4 days to become an expert in building Move-based applications. So maybe if you're writing Solidity, the mindset will be a bit different because you're thinking of account-based systems. Developers are finding a very natural onboarding experience for developers for building on Move. So we've seen a significant increase. I think it was about 114% increase in last Masari's report on devs on Move.
Alex, you look like you
Yeah,
want to add
so
something to it.
I think, first of all, at Ronin, we agree developer experience is really, really important. We try to build that out as well. We have that as a pillar of focus. But at the same time, what we believe is that it's actually one of the hardest things in blockchain gaming to solve is the economic problem in terms of game design, game development. So, for example, we do not believe in partnering with that many AAA beautiful game studios. There are a few that maybe would be an outlier, but we are quite wary of that because the development cycles are so long and the iterations that game studios need to make on the particularly economy design piece is so heavy. I think the higher the the longer the development cycles are, the harder it is for them to iterate and actually to create better and deeper economic loops. So we care a lot about MMOs and Pixels, I guess, as an example, even Forgotten Runeverse, now we have Lumiterra. All of these games are, I would say, fairly easy to add new features to or to create different type of deeper game loops. And then you can start looking at, okay, for example, crafting, right? Even do comparisons to crude oil in real life. I know Hilmar from CCP loves using this example. Like, okay, so you have crude oil. What does it take to actually get that into the real world, into actually being used, right? So you have all these steps in between. And I think that's really difficult to do as a game developer. But at the end of the day, when you start to create these quite complex design loops, it means that at every step of the way, you actually create a new job. Something that someone needs to do inside your game to be of service for others. And I really want to kind of, if possible, talk a little bit more about what's the potential for blockchain games rather than just kind of be on the development side of it. Because what I'm very passionate about is kind of building the future of games, which actually will enable jobs for hundreds of millions of people. And we actually saw that happen to an extent in Axie with SLP. And I think that these are the stakes that we are playing for, and that's why it's so important to find the right people that have this experience within MMOs in particular. I think there's a lot of Chinese developers that have really, really deep experience with these economic loops that will have a bigger chance of success, and that's actually what we are focusing on right now at Ronin, but also trying to do that. Like, is it possible to even do that for mobile phones, for example? Because that's where you would find the most of the users in emerging markets. So it's incredibly exciting for me to think about the opportunity space that we are in right now.
I do want to say something, but I think we want to bring Michael on
yeah,
stage.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
On stage, Michael. And it's good because you want to talk about deep games with a lot of economy and a lot of opportunity. So now we can ask game developer about this stuff.
Yeah, perfect.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, guys.
What's up?
Great.
Hey,
Hey there.
Welcome.
How are you? Thanks.
how are you doing, man?
I heard somebody mention Star Atlas, and I thought I would join the conversation.
Yeah, do you want to close out this point?
Yeah, so maybe just quickly, I agree with this. I think the one thing that we should also look at, I mean, I guess my first point is that one of the things that we found in our own experiences with portfolios and our own experiences is that when you move a Web2 gamer to Web3, actually what happens is that one of the big reasons why it often doesn't convert so well is because they lack financial literacy, as in they don't know why they're in Web3, right? They're like, oh, I have a wallet, great, what do I do with this now? Like, I don't know what asset ownership does, right? So there's a process that isn't purely technological. It's an understanding, and I think gaming is good at that because we do storytelling, and actually we learn through storytelling. So I think that's one element. And I think what Axie did, for instance, in the Philippines is an example of conversion, right? These are people who were not didn't even have bank accounts, and then they became included in the financial ecosystem. It created employment, but the key point was that they had to become somewhat financially literate, which many of the gamers don't think of it that way, right? So I think the West struggles with that in many ways more, right? And the other thing, just to close at the point is, as we talk deeper about the economic loops, is that there's a new type of gamer that Web3 is bringing in. In the same way that when mobile came, many people don't remember that in 2010, 11, actually the gaming business was stagnating. It wasn't growing at all. Actually, what made it grow was mobile. But actually what happened with mobile gaming is it brought a new type of gamer that was more casual and that was actually able to play games in a much more simplistic manner. Through the swipe of a finger, I was suddenly a great gamer, whether this was Candy Crush or Angry Birds. And as billions of gamers came into the space, which is now about 3+ billion, a percentage of them said, oh, you know what? Let me go into console games and try something deeper. And actually, that's where the conversion happened, right? So the PlayStation 3 did badly. The PlayStation 4 exploded in sales. It had nothing to do with Sony. It had everything to do with more players coming in, right? And I think now, there's about 6-7 billion people that are online, but 3 billion do not play games. And what we've noticed in Web3 is that those people who are owning assets actually are not necessarily the ones who play games. So I see it as a new category of gamer, a new meta gamer that's coming into the space that's actually growing the entire gaming pie, not just specifically us taking Web2 gamers into Web3, but actually a new category of gamer that hadn't really existed before.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Actually, just a quick one. We used to say, or I guess I said that the total addressable market for Axie is every person in the world. Now, you don't want to say that on Bloomberg because obviously the normal people will think you're a crazy person. But for me, I actually believe that. I think that a blockchain game done right will create a new GDP for the world. Like, it's a new way to experience work. It's a new way to experience fun. It's basically kind of Ready Player One. Just at first, it will be lower fidelity, and then it will be higher and higher and higher. And there's actually no limit to how big this can grow. It's just bits on a computer, but visually it can be massive compared to where we are today. Like, it's impossible for us to grow out of the physical kind of area that we have here on Earth unless we travel to the stars. But in the digital space, we can build to our own imagination. So that's what excites me.
Perhaps I can jump in and riff on this for a little bit, since I did just show up.
I had a question specifically for you.
And I apologize for being fashionably late. My excuse is the F1 road closures, but hopefully I can bring a banger or two out here to complement the conversation. But I think this idea that the gentlemen were just speaking about is that when you introduce and couple real-world digital economies with the gaming experience, the motivation for an individual to join a game could be significantly different than what we've seen historically. The entertainment product itself, I like to think of as the initial attraction to a digital society. So you'll get the gamers in that want to play and want to have fun, and they start to build out the population. But then you get entrepreneurs that are interested in joining in as well because they see an economic opportunity to perhaps provide a product or a service to those users. One of the things I think Axie did exceptionally well was this scholarship model, where you had people that were effectively investing in game assets, not with the intention of playing for themselves, but providing those to other users who were interested in leveraging the game assets. And for them, it was purely an investment decision-making process. Can I leverage a workforce, a labor force, to produce income for me passively through the assets that I possess? And I think we're going to see that proliferate throughout all Web3 games, just because, or perhaps not all of them, but I think largely, in particular in massively multiplayer online games, we'll see it proliferate because you have this expansive universe, this expansive environment, and ideally you will see opportunities through niche engagement of the game to open up to people all over the world. And so between the people that are investing in assets, that are playing in games, that are looking for social experiences in these worlds, and I also think that things like concerts and other types of entertainment activations that go on will be extremely popular. And you could get, to your point, the entire world population joining a game to go watch a concert, not necessarily because they care about the game, but because that's where the activation is taking place.
Cool, thank you. One thing that we talk a lot about internally, and I think to the point of opportunities of crypto games, right, Alex, is the notion of crypto genre fit. We try to think a lot about which game genres work better with certain implementations of crypto. And I think the TLDR is we've generally gravitated towards the view that if you want deep, complex economies, you need deep, complex games. Earlier on in crypto, I think that we saw a lot of complex economics strapped on simpler games and a bit difficult. And so we want to see that depth. But at the same time, I agree with you that the long lead times are difficult. I mean, from our side, from a capital markets perspective, you do a seed round for a game that will take 4 years. When it comes to time to raise the A round, depending on the prices of coins, like there's just so much variance, right? And I think that this is a great point of conversation to pull Michael in as well, which is how do you think about going into a journey of something that will take 4, 5, 6 years to develop in a market that moves every 5 days. How do you think about the risk? How have you managed the challenges? And there's one theory that is just ship Axie, get a bunch of people, and we'll figure it out later, right? And then the other theory is like, hey, let's take 5 or 6 years in Star Atlas, and pros and cons of those.
So wait, I'll before I guess you start with Star Atlas and the 5-year journey. I think briefly about Axie. As you said, the economic loop, it worked. But maybe what people are judging us based on a very early economic loop. I mean, we shipped something, we didn't know how it would go, and then you see extraneous capital, or particularly traders on Binance, start listing or SLP and trading SLP, and it basically bootstrapped the entire economy and made it artificially high. So you end up in a situation where there's a lot of expectation on the ecosystem versus where it actually is from a developed perspective. So it was an early stage economic loop. And to your point, like, we need more. We need more of these like small things. Like you build a complex system by taking small pieces one step at a time. Like, you cannot try to build everything at once because the complexities and the dependencies will be too massive. So you need one step at a time, and from there, a complexity can occur. There is simplicity, there's beauty in simplicity. That's what I believe in, and that's also kind of what we follow at Sky Mavis. But yeah, complex systems over time has to be the goal because they enable more niche jobs inside these ecosystems. And when it comes to gaming or games in particular, we believe that all blockchain games are MMOs inherently. The second you have an NFT in the market, that's when the timeline begins. That's really when one area or one niche of the community can become basically kings, right? So this is one thing that we see sometimes when we merge communities from another chain to Ronin, is like, you have these like elite players, the kings of that community that have been playing this game, and then, oh, now it's coming into Ronin. Suddenly you have like these pleb players that somehow needs to like become equal. You need to equalize the two communities, because if not, you get a very unhealthy type of ecosystem. Not saying that all Ronin players are plebs, of course, but at the beginning, you end up in a situation where you have a very unfair advantage for the people who have played for a longer time. And this is basically the same for any sort of, particularly Chinese MMO, where it has been in the market for so long that it's really difficult to get started. So that kind of merging of the communities to get everyone on the equal ground is something that we are very focused on when we assist our player base to get started with Ronin.
I do want to raise one quick point, which is that while that's important to make sure the sort of starting field is somewhat equitable, I think we need to be careful about thinking about it being equal, because I think that's the problem about Web2 gamers going to Web3. Because I think of Web2 game designers mostly as quite socialist in their thinking, right? Assets don't have value, everyone's the same, you can pay as much money as you want, we're all the same, because it's based on this merit base, which basically Web3 is a capitalist system. So ownership should get you to some advantage, right? And capitalism at its root is not about basically it's about equity, but it's not about equality, right? And I think there is a differential between that. And I do think a lot of Web2 game designers get it wrong in Web3 when they don't want to sort of attribute asset, because in real life, actually, ownership of assets does give us an advantage. So I think the successful Web3 titles do embrace capitalism and the principles, which, by the way, includes volatility, right? I mean, capitalism inherently is volatile, and I think it's actually not a bug, it's a feature. Some people will argue it's a bug, but actually, I think inherently, it's those changes, the dynamism, and also the movement of capitalism that gives the incentives for third parties to come in and build these network effects, right? Because you have money in the system, because SLP basically became liquid. Third parties came in and innovated on things like, basically the guild systems and whatever, that maybe you wouldn't have thought about at the time, and then new network effects build and innovation happens, right? I mean, it's capitalism that is the engine of that type of innovative growth.
I think have to be careful here, because if not, you end up in a system that, I mean, obviously it's very similar to real life, but if you are a person in real life that's struggling and you feel like everything is unfair, capitalism, like you cannot get ahead. Suddenly you start playing a game and, oh shit, like here's the same thing all over again. I'm getting stomped in this one too. Like, games are oftentimes about escape fantasy, like particularly coin masters or mobile games in particular. Like, people want to win all the time. So you really have to at least put them on the journey that they can see some kind of success, which is why gamification is great, which is why when you play games, you feel happy, you feel excited because you're taking on this journey. That's where we have the advantage of kind of easing players into this kind of not equality, but yeah, equity, I would say, is a bit better.
I mean, this is the perspective. I live in Hong Kong, he lives in Norway, right? But please, yes.
You know, I think Alexander made a very interesting comment that any Web3 game is essentially an MMO in nature. And to contrast that, I would say it would be difficult to make an argument for a single-player game to incorporate any type of NFT or digital asset with real value, because who's the counterparty that's willing to purchase that asset if there's no way to, technically sell that to another person? Now, in the case of Ronin, though, and since we are talking about the metaverse here, the idea of game interoperability is a very prominent topic. Are you able to transfer assets or progression or XP systems from one game into another game? And what are the restrictions or barriers on doing so? And I think to the extent that there is a protocol level directive, which I think is kind of what Ronin is. You guys are controlling the games that are getting in, at least at inception, and I'm sure that's going to open up over time. But there's a very tight network of people that are involved in the Ronin network today. And
actually, I just have to say we have our lawyer in the crowd here. The validators are controlling who is being able. It's not me. It's not Ronin.
It's all you, I thought. But anyway, but with respect to the concept of how do you build a game given the volatility of digital assets over a 5-year or perhaps 10-year timeline in our case, I think what you have to understand first and foremost is that being involved in the development process is part of the experience for the user, right? So they get to see behind the curtains. They get to influence the way game decisions are made. We have an incredible community. I see a couple of guys from AFIA right over here, and they're out at all of the events, and they're communicating with us every single day, and we're interacting with them in Discord all of the time, taking in feedback. And that allows us to ultimately land on the product that we know the user and the customer or the community wants, because they've told us at every step along the way. Now, this is also very much a crowdfunding process, and so as we're building, we're taking in revenue, which allows us to continue with the development of the game. But I think another thing people have to realize is that the economy itself is also a product. It's not just the game. I mean, it's the coupling of the two of those that really delivers this ultimate value proposition that Web3 brings. And so to the extent that you're able to bring out a sophisticated economy that enables people to produce income for themselves, I do think this is critical. They can produce revenue for themselves. They will be more willing to tolerate the timeline that it might take to bring a full product to market, because they have something to satisfy and intrigue their interest today. And so between those, we've done a phenomenal job at Star Atlas as being able to maintain and sustain an economy through really phenomenal times in 2021, but also dealing with the chaos of FTX in 2022 and the fallout of that in 2023. And I think now we're in a really great position to kind of follow up on that as we go into the next leg of this market cycle.
Awesome.
I just want to add one quick point around, when you mentioned about sort of the token as a product, it's quite important to sort of, for builders in the space to look at it from that lens, because tokens represent essentially the state of your network. The volatility is not just the utility, it also is the sentiment, right? It's a way for you to measure the audience, it's also to think about the space. I think that's an important one. And the other way is that when we think about interoperability, we don't just think of it in terms of moving assets, we actually think of it as sort of reputation interoperability, right? When you think of it in a Web2 gaming standpoint, if you're really good at Fortnite, maybe you could have credit at Apex Legends or other types of environments. There's a credit, and actually, this is where airdrops come in, where I say, hey, I want that gamer, so I'm going to give you a benefit to come play my game. That's actually possible in Web3, where you go directly to the user as opposed to using third-party platforms.
Thank you.
You just have to be careful about bribing users versus like bringing sustainable real value. That's
well, they become owners, right? Yeah.
So we have 30 seconds left. I'll wrap us up with a quick round. I just want to know, what's the last game you spent a bunch of time on, starting with Adani? What are you playing?
Sorry, I missed the question.
What game?
What game are you playing currently?
Oh, I'm a VR guy, so I've always played on Oculus. Population 1's my thing.
VR? Michael?
I bought into the Black Myth Wukong hype. I'm playing that right now. And then I've been playing a little bit of Off the Grid from the Web3 side.
Alex?
3 games, I guess. Age of Empires 4 a little bit, Diablo 4, and then I play a little bit of Squad Busters on my mobile phone.
Yeah, so I mean, because my kids play Apex Legends, so I do play it, although I'm not that good, they tend to carry me. But the other game that I'm starting to get into is I like chess, and so Chess is one of the games that we're starting to get into.
Right on.
Oh, I did play Forgotten Universe also the other day, which is on Ronin, so that's, yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm on Wukong myself. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you all for this wonderful conversation.
Cool.
And
Thank you.
for giving me the pleasure of moderating it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.